Hello, welcome to day 3 of 100 days of network automation. I'm Roger, and today we're starting on Ansible. So I'm going to show you why you need to learn Ansible and some very basics, and then over the next 8 days we're going to be going into all the elements of using Ansible and coming up to the end with a little mini project that you've got a working example. Also, all the code that I'm doing from now on is going to go into a repo. I'll put the link to that repo in the description so you can take all the code and follow along and do whatever you like. Now, I'm also going to introduce you to VS Code. So if you've not heard of that, I am now using VS Code. This is my code editor. I am working locally at the moment, but we will look at how to connect this to your remote servers in another video when I do the VS Code section. So for now, I'm in my empty folder. I'm going to use UV. I'm going to install Ansible. And then from there on, I'll go through some basics and explain why you need to use Ansible. And then we'll get into the meat and the bones. So first of all, I'm in the folder. I'm just going to initialize this folder with UV. And if you've not heard of UV, I will be covering this in a later video, so don't worry too much about this at the moment. I just need to get Ansible installed so you can see that. And to install Ansible using UV, you just say UV add Ansible. And this pulls down all the packages I need, and you can see, bang, it did it in about 554 milliseconds. So now I'm going to go into my virtual environment, and I will have Ansible 2.18.7 installed. So I am now running Ansible Core in a virtual environment on my Mac, and this is completely clean. There's nothing in here. So we're going to be building this literally from the ground up so you can see exactly how I set Ansible up. Now, the first question is why you should use Ansible, and the answer to that is Ansible is really simple to get started with. Ansible is written in Python, but you don't need to know any Python to operate it. It runs with some configuration files, and you write what is called playbooks in YAML, which we're going to delve into. And most of the things that you're going to do are going to be copying from other people that have done things already. There's very little to do with Ansible where you've got to sit down and scratch your head and try and reinvent the wheel. So Ansible is so well used that if you want to do something, someone's done it before, you can take the code and you can get started really easily. Now, there's only a few key elements to Ansible, what you need. And we're going to build that up in here now and show you how that works. So you need a configuration file that tells Ansible a few key elements. You need an inventory, and then you need a playbook. And you also, excuse me, I'm going to cough. You might need an Ansible collection depending on the devices that you're running. And also, just to say, Ansible has to be installed in a Linux environment. So I'm running it directly on my Mac. You can run it on Ubuntu. You can run it in any Linux server. But if you're on Windows, then you will need to install the Windows subsystem for Linux, or something like a virtual machine where you can run Linux. But Ansible will not run natively in Windows, so it has to run on a Linux box. So saying that, we've got a few things to set up. And let's set up the Ansible configuration file first. So we need to create a file called ansible.cfg. And in this file, it contains some basic things to tell Ansible how we want it to run. Now you can see here, this is my Ansible config file off my main server. And I'm just going to go through. So basically it's the defaults section of the configuration file. And it's just saying to Ansible, my inventory lives in a file called hosts. And I'm not going to do any host key checking, as most of this is going to be lab work. I'm going to automatically add host keys when I connect. We're not going to create retry files. So in Ansible, when a job fails, it will automatically create you a file. We don't want that. Forks is how many concurrent connections Ansible can do at once. So if you've got 1,000 devices, you run a playbook, it will only target 20 at a time. We're not going to gather facts. That is based on when Ansible used to run, or it does still run. I mean, Ansible is more for a Linux server management, and it can gather facts back from servers. We don't want to do that for network devices. And our Python interpreter, and this is just warnings. We're going to disable some of the warnings, which we don't want to see. So that is my basic configuration file. And I'm going to go back one step just to tell you how Ansible works. So Ansible is literally going to SSH to a network device and make a change. Now, when you run Ansible against a server, it would copy Python script onto the server and then run it on the server. You can't do that on network devices. So Ansible literally connects to the device using SSH, and then the task is run from your local machine. In my case, I'm on my laptop, and a laptop is plenty powerful to run a lot of Ansible stuff, which we'll see later. So Ansible configuration file. The next one is the host file. So you can see in my configuration, I've said that the inventory is going to live in here, /hosts. So let's create a file called hosts. Hosts, yeah. And then we will create a simple inventory of a couple devices, just so you can see what they look like. And I'm going to a couple of these. So these are my routers. So these are the devices we're going to connect to. And the way that you set up your host file is you create a group like this. So this is going to be my CSR routers group. And then underneath R1, R2, and R3. Now, if you can resolve those names in DNS and they'll resolve to an IP address, you don't need to put this section in, but this is my lab. R1, if I ping R1 from here, it's not going to resolve to anything. So you then define the IP address in here, saying Ansible_host, and then give it the IP address. Later in this series, we'll be using things like Netbox for the inventory. So all of this will be a connection to Netbox to pull back this data. But to get started, let's use the host file in here. So that's the CSR routers. These are the devices I'm going to target. So now we've got the inventory of the devices we're going to connect to. We now need to tell Ansible how to connect to them. So in there, we create a folder, and we're going to call that group vars, which stands for group variables. So this is going to be, and it has to look like this, group vars. And then in that folder, we create a file called all. Now, the way that Ansible works is with a precedence of all, and then groups, and then hosts. So if you have, well, let's put the details in. So I'm just going to grab my group vars file. So this is my default login credentials. And I'm not breaking any rules showing you my password. So Ansible user, Ansible SSH pass, the OS, and the Ansible connection. So this is telling Ansible that for all devices, we're going to use the password of Cisco, the username of Roger. It is iOS that we're connecting to, and we're going to use the network CLI as the connection method. Now, if I had other devices, e.g. Juniper, Nexus, an F5, something different, I would then go into the group vars and I would create a new file and I would call that F5. And in there, we would then put a different password and a different username and a different connection method. But for now, we're going to stick with just the Cisco. And these are the credentials I'm going to use to connect. So we've now got two pieces of information. We've got the devices that we want to connect to and how we're going to connect to them. The final piece of the jigsaw is going to be what we're going to do on those devices. And that is done with a playbook. So you create a playbook, which creates, it's just a list of tasks, and then you run the playbook and it goes off and does those tasks. So let's create a playbook. So we're going to call the playbook, let's call this, we'll call it playbook 1 to start with. So let's just paste in a very simple playbook, and this is going to back up the devices on my network. Now I will say that YAML is very picky in how it's put together, so you have to get the indentation perfect, and which is one of the benefits of using VS Code, is it's going to tell you if you've got things out of sync. These lines will show you where stuff is, and it has to be perfect, else Ansible will throw an error. People prefer Python for its debugging. I quite like Ansible, but I'm just going to talk you through the basics of this playbook, and then that's going to be it for today. And then in tomorrow's lesson, we'll start to run these and start to get some output. So the basics of a playbook are hosts, which devices I am going to target for this playbook. So this is telling Ansible in hosts, I want you to target all the devices in the CSR routers group. So if we go into my hosts file over here, CSR routers, router 1, 2, and 3. So this playbook is going to target router 1, router 2, and router 3. And then we do the tasks. These are the tasks that we want to perform. And I've given it a simple name. So this is a descriptive name called backup. So we're going to back up, we can call it backup CSR routers. This is what displays when you run the playbook. And then we're using this. Now this is a collection. This is an Ansible collection, which is basically a Python file. It's a library, it's a folder in Ansible that contains all the code that tells Ansible how to connect to a Cisco device. So it's written with understanding of how Cisco IOS works, so it knows how to connect to it, it knows the commands to run and how to interface with that device. Now, as of Ansible 2.10, Ansible split the core install away from the collections. So all the vendors then develop their own collections. So you can install any of these collections using Ansible Galaxy, which we're going to do in the next day. But this lets you install the collection independently of Ansible. So if you're working with Juniper, say, and there was a bug and you couldn't get this thing to work, and Juniper said, oh, we're going to fix that in the next release of the collection, give it a few days, the collection's released and you can download it and use your Ansible to do that task. Now, I have had issues where I couldn't get Ansible to work, and I was working directly with a vendor, and they would they'd work on a patch specifically for an error. If it's a big enough problem, they'll put developers on it to work on it. And most vendors now have dedicated developers working on Ansible collections. So this is the collection that we're going to use. Now the collection is actually the Cisco.ios, and then we're running the sub collection here, which is iOS command. And the command we're going to run is show run. And then we're going to register the output of the show run command into something called config. Now this is just a name. And then the second task is we're going to save the output into a folder called backups, which doesn't exist at the moment. So let's just create that folder. So that folder exists. And then the content, so std out is the output that Ansible generates. And we're going to say copy. So copy is an Ansible built-in module. So we're using the copy module within Ansible to copy the config, which is saved here. So the entire running config of that device into destination backups. Now here, this is a Ansible variable, and this is a built-in variable, and it's inventory underscore hostname, which directly relates to my host file here. So these are the inventory underscore host names. So what's going to happen is we're going to back up the routers, and then we're going to create 3 files, and they will be R1, R2, and R3. So what Ansible will do is replace inventory hostname each time with this, or R2 or R3. -config.txt. So we're going to end up with 3 files, r1.txt, r2.txt, and r3.txt. Now you can change this to be whatever you like, it doesn't matter. In fact, I might just change this to config.cfg. It's whatever you want. So that is an Ansible playbook in its pretty much simplest form. And then you go into your Ansible and you run Ansible playbooks by running Ansible-playbook and then the name of the playbook. Now this is going to fail because I don't have devices spinning. I haven't set up a few things. We've got errors. I'll address one of these errors now, and then in the next video on day 4, we're going to start to fix this. So this is telling me something called Ansible pylib SSH. So when I said about Ansible connecting to the devices using SSH, it uses this library, and then it falls back to Paramiko, which is one of the default SSH methods, and it also says Paramiko is not installed. So I'm going to just install Ansible pylib SSH. And if I'm using UV, that's easy. UV add Ansible pylib SSH. This will pull down all the files needed to make that connection work. And also, once this repo is up, I'll put a instruction on how to run UV and to sync everything and bring it all together. So you can have this exact environment running on your machine. Okay, now it turns out I cannot install Ansible pylib SSH using UV, which is interesting. So this is quite a new thing for me. So we're going to have to install this with pip using this command. And I don't have that either. Hold on, let's figure this out. Okay, so I'm just going to try installed pip in UV, and now this should work. Ugh. Okay, so pip3 install Ansible pylib SSH. So that's a new one. I've just recently started using UV, and it's really good, but I've never seen this error before. So that's another thing with Ansible, it keeps you on your toes. So let's just let this install, and then we should have Ansible pylib SSH running, and then we can go on from there. Okay, so for now I've just done a UV add Paramiko. That's got Paramiko installed, which is the fallback connection. So let's just run the playbook again. And as I said, it's going to fail because I don't have devices, but it shouldn't throw that error now. figure out how to get Ansible PyLib SSH installed for the next one. So this is now what I expect. So I'm getting a warning that Ansible PyLib SSH is not installed. It forwarded back to Paramiko, and then it tried to connect to router 1, 2, and 3, and it failed. It timed out because the devices aren't running. So I'm going to spin those up, ready for the next video. So if you've enjoyed this and you like this sort of stuff and you want to learn more about Ansible, please do hit that subscribe button. I'll be back tomorrow where we're going to connect to these devices and start to do some backups. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.